South Korea removes President Park Geun-hye. Seoul, South Korea. A South Korean court ousted the president on Friday, a first in the nation's history, rattling the delicate balance of relationships across Asia at a particularly tense time. Removal capped months of turmoil, as hundreds of thousands of South Koreans took to the streets, week after week, to protest a sprawling corruption scandal that shook the top echelons of business and government. Park Geun-hye, the nation's first female president and the daughter of the Cold War military dictator Park Chung-hee, had been an icon of the conservative establishment that joined Washington in pressing for a hard line against North Korea's nuclear provocations. Now, her downfall is expected to shift South Korean politics to the opposition, whose leaders want more engagement with North Korea and are wary of a major confrontation in the region. They say they will re-examine the country's joint strategy on North Korea with the United States and defuse tensions with China, which has sounded alarms about the growing American military footprint in Asia. Ms. Park's powers were suspended in December after a legislative impeachment vote, though she continued to live in the presidential Blue House, largely alone and hidden from public view, while awaiting the decision by the Constitutional Court. The house had been her childhood home. She first moved in at the age of 9 and left it nearly 2 decades later after her mother and father were assassinated in separate episodes. With the immunity conferred by her office now gone, Ms. Park, 65, faces prosecutors seeking to charge her with bribery, extortion and abuse of power in connection with allegations of conspiring with a confidant, her childhood friend Kwon-sil, to collect tens of millions of dollars in bribes from big businesses like Samsung. By law, the country must elect a new president within 60 days. The acting president, Hwang Kyo-ahn, an ally of Ms. Park's, will remain in office in the interim. The Trump administration is rushing a missile defense system to South Korea so that it can be in place before the election. The last time a South Korean leader was removed from office under popular pressure was in 1960, when the police fired on crowds calling for President Syngman Rhee to step down. Mr. Rhee, a dictator, fled into exile in Hawaii and died there. In a sign of how far South Korea's young democracy has evolved, Ms. Park was removed without any violence, after large, peaceful protests in recent months demanding that she step down. In addition to the swell of popular anger, the legislature and the judiciary, two institutions that have been weaker than the presidency historically, were crucial to the outcome. This is a miracle, a new milestone in the strengthening and institutionalizing of democracy in South Korea, said Kang Won-tik, a political scientist at Seoul National University. When crowds took to the streets, they were not just seeking to remove a leader who had 1 year left in office. They were also rebelling against a political order that had held South Korea together for decades but is now fracturing under pressures both at home and abroad, analysts said. Ms. Park's father ruled South Korea from 1961 to 1979. He founded its economic growth model, which transformed the nation into an export powerhouse and allowed the emergence of family-controlled conglomerates known as SEOUL that benefited from tax cuts, anti-labor policies and other benefits from the government. Ms. Park was elected in 2012 with the support of older conservative South Koreans who revered her father for the country's breakneck economic growth. But the nexus of industry and political power gave rise to collusive ties, highlighted by the scandal that led to Ms. Park's impeachment. The scandal also swept up to de facto head of Samsung, Lee Jeong, who was indicted on charges of bribing Ms. Park and her confidant, Ms. Kwon. Samsung, the nation's largest conglomerate, has been tainted by corruption before. But the company has been considered too important to the economy for any of its top leaders to spend time behind bars until now. The jailing of Mr. Lee, who is facing trial, is another potent sign that the old order is not holding. In the wake of the Park scandal, all political parties have vowed to curtail presidential power to pardon ABOL tycoons convicted of white-collar crimes. They also promised to stop ABOL chairmen from helping their children amass fortunes through dubious means, like forcing their companies to do exclusive business with the children's businesses. With the Conservatives discredited and no leading Conservative candidate to succeed Ms. Park, the left could take power for the first time in a decade. The dominant campaign issues will probably be North Korea's nuclear weapons program and South Korea's relations with the United States and China. If the opposition takes power, it may try to revive its old sunshine policy of building ties with North Korea through aid and exchanges, an approach favored by China. That would complicate Washington's efforts to isolate the North at a time other Asian nations like the Philippines are gravitating toward Beijing. Moon Jae-in, the Democratic Party leader who is leading in opinion surveys, has said that a decade of applying sanctions on North Korea has failed to stop its nuclear weapons programs. He has said that sanctions are necessary, but that their goal should be to draw North Korea back to the negotiating table. He believes that Ms. Park's decision to allow the deployment of the American missile defense system known as Terminal High Altitude Area Defense SEOUL has dragged the country into the dangerous and growing rivalry between Washington and Beijing. China has called the system a threat to its own security and taken steps to punish South Korea economically for accepting it. Conservative South Koreans see the deployment of the anti-missile system not only as a guard against the North, but also as a symbolic reaffirmation of the all-important alliance with the United States. Mr. Moon's party demands that the deployment, which began this week, be suspended immediately. If it takes power, it says it will review the deployment of the anti-missile system to determine if it is in South Korea's best interest. As South Korea has learned in painful fashion, it cannot always keep Washington and Beijing happy at the same time, as in the case of the country's decision to deploy the American missile defense system. Yet Ms. Park's impeachment was also a pushback against Cold War conservatives like her father, who seized on communist threats from North Korea to silence political opponents and hide their corruption, said Kim Dong-geun, a sociologist at Geun-hye University in Seoul. Ms. Park's father tortured and even executed dissidents, framing them with spying charges. Now, his daughter faces charges that her government blacklisted thousands of unfriendly artists and writers, branding them pro-North Korean, and denied them access to government support programs. Her removal means that the curtain is finally drawing on the authoritarian political and economic order that has dominated South Korea for decades, said Ahn Bong-jin, rector of the Global Academy for Future Civilizations at Geun-hye University in Seoul. Analysts cautioned that political and economic change will come slowly. As Mr. Moon put it recently, we need a national cleanup. We need to liquidate the old system and build a new South Korea. Only then can we complete the revolution started by the people who rallied with candlelight.